The Trump administration has marked its first 100 days in office, and on Press Perspective today, we touch upon its trade initiatives and their diplomatic implications. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective. It's Wednesday, April 30th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. Now, just a day earlier, the Trump administration celebrated its first 100 days at the top office. So what have been the broader implications of the administration's America First policy? To answer that question and more, I have Lee Ji-hoon with news agency Reuters here in the studio. Ji-hoon, welcome back.
Glad to be here.
I also have Professor Kim Yong-Jin at Sogang University joining our talk virtually. Professor Kim, as always, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Happy to be here.
We will start with you, Ji-hoon. Let's begin with details of an article by your news agency Reuters regarding the Trump administration's first 100 days in office and its impact on diplomacy and trade. Let's begin with diplomacy, Ji-hoon. What's the assessment on that front?
Yeah, we had an article recapping the first 100 days of the Trump administration, and it is assessed that his America First policy has been more radical than during his first term. Just to name a few, one of the first executive orders he signed was renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, and he also spoke about making Canada the 51st state and retaking the Panama Canal and annexing Greenland. On the Ukraine war, President Trump has reversed U.S. policy as he was seen to prioritize his relations with Russia's Putin. And he had a fierce argument with Ukraine President Zelensky when he visited the White House for military aid. He has not been so friendly to Asian and European allies as well, which experts say is his America First policy turning into America Alone policy. They say it has been a huge disruption to the world order, which since the World War II has been based on rule of law, free trade, respect for territory led by the United States. They say the future might be a return to something like a Cold War era, where big powers compete for bigger influence. The key question that is being asked these days is if other countries will build closer relationships with China for leverage, or if China will see it as an opportunity to widen its influence. For example, with the European Union, China recently said it discussed ways to strengthen economic cooperation. And Chinese President Xi Jinping recently visited Southeast Asian countries to deepen their ties as they are China's closest neighbors as well as hit hard by U.S. tariffs. There are some signs of such efforts with Korea as well. We are seeing media reports that Chinese President Xi Jinping might visit South Korea for the APEC summit later this year. And that comes after South Korea decided to offer visa-free entry to Chinese travelers, following China's visa-free policy last year. We are also seeing media reports that China is lifting its unofficial ban on the Korean wave, with K-pop concerts being prepared in China, which is another sign of improving ties between South Korea and China.
Right, and before we delve further into that, Professor Kim, with regard to South Korea, Reuters claims debate has intensified here about developing a nuclear arsenal. What would be, Professor Kim, the potential economic implications of South Korea seeking to strengthen its defense capabilities, do you think?
Well, I want to make it clear, the developing our own nuclear power, nuclear arsenal is one thing, and the strengthening our defense capabilities on other, right? They are different, but it can go together, and or it can go, separately. But basically, as you mentioned, in South Korea, there are the number of people are increasing, including politicians who are advocating for a more capable national military and the shift toward greater independence from the United States. They are, even arguing that developing our own nuclear arsenal will be beneficial for the national security. However, it might be a highly risky course of action that could undermine national security. To deal with the threat from China, the United States need allies, and more importantly, need capable and reliable allies. While South Korea is focusing on defense cost sharing when we deal with the tariff issues with the Trump administration, but U.S. seems not merely seek financial contributions from the Korea, just like defense cost sharing. It wants partners who are prepared to defend themselves and contribute meaningfully to the regional stability. So it would be like Pacific Indian, like a strategy, right? So it can be applied to European allies too. Some European allies, for instance, are looking to boost their own defense industry to reduce reliance on the U.S. weapons. However, this kind of circumstances or this kind of trend do not mean that South Korea need to be equipped with nuclear weapons. If South Korea tries to develop its own nuclear arsenal or nuclear power, it will be like a disaster. I mean, South Korea will face huge resistance from the global community. And probably, a lot of sanctions, at the UN level will be imposed to Korea. And then Korea is, solely depend on the export for the economic growth. So if, these kind of sanctions would be imposed onto Korea, and it will make South Korean economy cannot stand. So that's kind of bold approach. I mean, if Korea has to develop its own nuclear arsenal, that's not right answer.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Professor Kim, as Ji-hoon mentioned earlier, quite a number of foreign media outlets is speaking about how the Trump administration's pressure on its partners could actually push its partners towards China. What are the prospects of such a scenario for South Korea, do you think?
Well, it's very, very intriguing and dilemmatic situation. If Mr. Trump pushed, Korea and Asian countries, they might be, get closer to China. That's very, clear, right? We can see those kind of things, from the recent trip of, Chinese President Xi Jinping. As a tariff war between the U.S. and United States and China intensified, Chinese President Xi Jinping made diplomatic visit to 3 Southeast Asian countries, including Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia recently, right? That's 5 days. And President Xi showcased the strengthened relations by signing dozens of cooperation documents with each country. Even though the effectiveness of this trip of President Xi might be quite, questionable, it shows very clear sign that China wants to make, Asian countries partners rather than the U.S. And also Asian countries may want to build more like a partnership with China. I think, this is a kind of a clear result, of the tariff war of the United States, not only between the U.S. and China, but basically all of the Asian countries are facing similar, challenges. So basically, I mean that the deteriorating the relations could prompt U.S. partners in Asia move closer to China, at least economically. South Korea, I think might need a similar scenario. Let's think about that. If we show Korea gets closer to China, and then what kind of things the U.S. might think of. So we may use that one as leverage for tariff negotiations with the U.S. But we have to be very, very cautious. Mr. Trump is not that much like I want to say that part, but considering those kind of factors, he believes he can do whatever he want to do with allies or partners who are enemies. So in terms of Korean perspective, we may have to make some other measures like to use as leverage, seems like to getting closer to China or Russia.
Right, I see. And speaking about Mr. Trump's tariffs, Ji-hoon, what has been shared about his trade policy thus far by Reuters?
Yeah, the keyword for Trump's trade policy has been undoubtedly tariffs. He has introduced tariffs on neighboring Canada and Mexico, and more than 100% tariffs on China, which have made bilateral trade between the world's two biggest economies practically impossible. He has also introduced tariffs on major trading partners, including the European Union, Asian allies like Japan and South Korea, and Southeast Asian countries. By sector, he has introduced tariffs on automobiles, steel, and aluminum, and suggests that more tariffs will come on semiconductors, auto parts, biopharmaceuticals, and electronic devices. That has roiled global financial markets with worries about a slowdown in global trade as well as the global economy. South Korea's Kospi, for example, fell to the lowest level in 17 months in recent weeks. More globally, the US dollar fell to its weakest level in 2 years on recession worries, while the Chinese yuan also hit a record low on worries about the trade war. In our survey this month, most economists said the risk of a global recession was very high this year, as the IMF cut its forecast for the global economic growth to 2.8% from 3.3%. And the World Trade Organization also cut its forecast for global trade to a fall of 0.2% from a rise of 3.0%. And there are signs the impact of US tariffs is already becoming a reality. South Korea is the first major economy to report monthly trade figures, and it is already expected that South Korea exports have fallen around 2% this month as shipments to the United States fell sharply, led by automobiles and steel products. After introducing various tariffs, the Trump administration is negotiating with other countries for trade deals. And it said already more than 70 countries have reached out to the US for negotiations. Still, experts say Trump's objectives are not so clear, and pressure might grow on the Trump administration as tariffs start to weigh on the US economy.
Right, indeed. And speaking about bilateral negotiations over tariffs, Professor Kim, acting President Han Duck-soo, in an interview with British outlet The Economist, reaffirmed his confidence in cooperation rather than confrontation with regard to tariff talks with the US. Do you suppose, Professor Kim, that this particular strategy will prevail regardless of who wins the presidential election here in South Korea on June 3rd?
Well, it's quite manifesting, I'm not quite certain, but considering all the factors, including economic, social, and defense that shape Korean society now, the cooperation with the U.S., will be a better strategy, than confrontation. That absolutely everybody knows. So, meaning, Korea is, relying on the export. U.S. is number one importing country, and China second, and we rely on, our national security, on U.S. Defense powers. So basically, the cooperation with the U.S. will be better strategy than the confrontation. But like I mentioned earlier, Korea, Trump, treat allies and enemies in the same way. So we, the Korea, need some more measures to use as a leverage in the negotiation, tariff negotiation. Like, some sign of collaboration with China and some sign of collaboration with Russia, and bringing, Japan, in the talk with China. That kind of, leverage we need. But the basic, absolutely, that is the leverage for the negotiation. I'm not saying that we have to get a lot closer, to China, but that wouldn't be a good strategy. But anyway, we need to show that kind of signs to the U.S. continuously, so that U.S. might be some kind of tensed. So we'll have some leverages, in the tariff talk.
Right, seeking leverage by ensuring balance then between South Korea and its regional partners as well as the U.S. And speaking about the U.S., Ji-hoon, there is also talk about the Trump administration looking into its options of engaging with North Korea. Could you tell us a bit more about this particular initiative and its importance?
Yep. During his first term, President Trump met with North Korea's Kim Jong-un for 3 times, starting with the Singapore summit in 2018. But then in February 2019, when they met for the second time in Vietnam, the summit collapsed on disagreement over nuclear weapons and sanctions. Later in 2019, they met again for the 3rd time, where they agreed to resume nuclear talks, but then no meaningful progress was made after that. And since his election victory last November, he has started to talk about his relationship with North Korea's Kim again. Even before taking office, his team already started discussing arranging direct talks with North Korea. And last month, President Trump said he has good relationship with North Korea, and he will seek to meet with him directly. On the North Korean side, meanwhile, there also have been some media reports about the Trump administration. In January, it started with a very brief acknowledgement of Trump's inauguration, but then in February, it issued a commentary criticizing Trump's foreign policy, and another one criticizing U.S. military activity around the Korean Peninsula. The strongest so far has been Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong's statement last month, which criticized U.S. military activity after U.S. participated in joint military exercise with Japan and South Korea with nuclear carrier and strategic assets. So thus far, it is fair to say the Trump administration has been very positive about direct talks with North Korea, but North Korea's stance on the Trump administration, at least on the surface, has been a little bit more negative. Still, South Korea says there is a possibility of surprise meeting between North Korea and the United States that can be held anytime in the future.
Right, and against this backdrop, Professor Kim, do you believe South Korea could perhaps leverage economic initiatives to engage North Korea?
Well, at the moment, I don't think, those economic incentives or initiatives will work to make North Korea engage in the, nuclear talk, because they already have a very strong nuclear power, which President Trump mentioned. And also they have, huge backup from Russia. So to make them engage in any kind of negotiation, the incentive needs to be significant. And moreover, North Korea has experienced several failures in the past in the nuclear negotiation on their own, and they saw other countries like Ukraine and Libya, Iran. All these countries, they almost, made the negotiation nuclear, talk, and then they get to close, conclusions to remove nuclear program. But the, regime, fell down eventually by the U.S. So at the time, if we want to make them engaged in that nuclear talk, with the U.S. or even South Korea, South Korea need to prepare very, very detailed program and procedures and a significant amount of economic incentives to be proposed.
Right, I see. Finally then, Ji-hoon, what does the Trump administration's next 100 days appear to look like?
Yep. So for the next 3 months, of course, the main focus will be on trade deals because President Trump is seeking to have deals with other countries after pausing tariffs. However, experts say it is highly unlikely those tariff deals will come in the next 3 months because they will take more time. After trade talks with South Korea and Japan this month, U.S. Treasury Secretary said he was very encouraged by productive and fast engagements. And Japan and South Korea seem to want trade deals before their elections. However, in Japan, there are already signs that these trade talks will not happen before its election in July, because it will be difficult for the government to make or take risks of making any bad deal ahead of the election. And similar in Korea, there is a presidential election in early June, which experts say makes it very difficult for South Korea to make firm commitments on energy projects, which are of Trump's interests under the current acting president. So overall, we are seeing a slightly different attitude between the U.S. and South Korea and Japan, with the U.S. seeking fast progress on those deals, while South Korea and Japan seem to be taking a more patient approach. Experts say Japan and South Korea will be the so-called test case for the success of Trump's administration's trade policies, because they are major U.S. allies as well as major exporting economies with high trade surpluses.
Right, which is why there is a lot of attention on the trade deals to be sealed between the U.S., South Korea, and of course the U.S. and Japan as well. All right, Ji-hoon, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Professor Kim, thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Right, well, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow. That is Thursday.